I never thought I'd return from a peaceful 2-week cruise to find an empty driveway where my house used to stand. Well, not literally empty, but close enough. The sold sign planted firmly in my front yard felt like a dagger through my heart. As I sat in my rental car, still wearing my vacation sundress, my luggage scattered in the back seat, staring at what had been my sanctuary for 23 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The bronze wind chimes I'd hung on the front porch were gone. The rose bushes I'd nursed through 5 harsh winters had been ripped out, leaving ugly brown patches in the earth. Even my ceramic garden gnome, the one my late husband Daniel had bought me as a joke that became a treasured memory, was nowhere to be seen. Everything that made this place mine had been erased while I was gone, sipping piña coladas and watching dolphins play in the ship's wake, blissfully unaware that my own children were dismantling my entire world back home. My name is Linda Chen, and at 58 years old, I thought I had life figured out. I'd raised 3 children as a single mother after Daniel passed away from cancer when our youngest was only 12. I'd worked double shifts as a nurse practitioner to keep us afloat, putting all 3 kids through college, helping them with down payments on their first homes, and always being the reliable mom they could count on. The house on Elmwood Drive wasn't just where we lived, it was where we became a family after losing the man who held us all together. I'd saved for 3 years for this cruise to Alaska, my first real vacation since Daniel died 8 years ago. It was supposed to be my celebration of finally paying off the last of my student loans, the ones I'd taken out to get my nurse practitioner degree after becoming a widow. My kids, Sarah, Michael, and Jessica, had encouraged me to go. Sarah, my eldest at 31, had even helped me book it online, laughing as I fumbled with the cruise line's website. "Mom, you deserve this," she'd said, her voice warm with what I thought was genuine affection. "We'll keep an eye on the house. Don't worry about anything. Just relax for once in your life." Michael, 29 and always the practical one, had nodded his agreement. "The house will be fine, Mom. We've got spare keys. I'll mow the lawn and bring in your mail. Just go have fun." Even Jessica, my baby at 26, had chimed in during our family dinner the week before I left. "Seriously, Mom, you haven't taken a real vacation since Dad died. We're adults now. We can handle things for 2 weeks." Their reassurances had melted away my last-minute anxieties about leaving. I'd worried about my neighbor Mrs. Patterson's cat, who liked to sleep in my garden. I'd fretted about the automatic sprinkler system and whether the timer would work properly. I'd even written detailed instructions about which plants needed extra water and how often to check the mail. Looking back, their enthusiasm for my departure should have raised red flags, but I was too excited about finally doing something for myself to notice. The cruise had been everything I'd dreamed of. I'd watched glaciers calving into pristine waters, seen eagles soaring overhead, and for the first time in years, I'd slept past 7 in the morning without guilt. I'd made friends with other travelers, joined a photography workshop, and even tried line dancing despite my protest that I had 2 left feet. Each night I'd stood on my balcony, wrapped in the complimentary bathrobe, watching the northern lights paint the sky in impossible colors, feeling something I hadn't experienced since before Daniel got sick. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I'd called home exactly once during the trip, on day 7, when the ship docked in Juneau, and I finally had decent cell service. Sarah had answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Mom, how's the cruise? Are you having the time of your life?" "It's incredible, honey. The scenery is just breathtaking. I took about 100 photos today of this glacier that was so blue it looked like someone had painted it." "That's wonderful. Don't worry about anything here. The house is perfect. Michael's been by twice to check on things, and Jessica helped me water your plants yesterday. Everything's under control." Something in her tone had struck me as slightly off, a forced quality to her cheerfulness that I couldn't quite place. But the ship's horn was blowing, signaling our departure, and I had to hurry to meet my photography group for the afternoon excursion. I should go, but I love you all. Give Michael and Jessica my love. Love you too, Mom. Enjoy every minute. That was 10 days ago. 10 days during which, apparently, my children had not only sold my house but had managed to close the deal and remove every trace of my existence from the property. The efficiency of it all was almost impressive in its cruelty. I sat in the rental car for 20 minutes, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I was seeing. The new owners, a young couple with a toddler, were already moving boxes into what had been my living room. They glanced at me curiously as they passed back and forth from their moving truck, probably wondering why this middle-aged woman was sitting in their driveway looking like she'd seen a ghost. Finally, I forced myself to get out of the car. My legs felt unsteady as I approached the front door, the door I'd painted cheerful yellow just last spring. The couple stopped their unpacking to look at me with polite confusion. "Excuse me," I said, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my house." The husband, a tall man with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, shook his head gently. "I'm sorry, but we just bought this place. Closed on it last Friday. The previous owner's children handled the sale." Previous owner. The words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm the previous owner," I managed. "I'm Linda Chen. My children are Sarah, Michael, and Jessica Chen." The wife, a petite woman with curly red hair, exchanged a worried glance with her husband. "Oh my goodness. We met with Sarah and Michael several times. They said their mother had moved to a retirement community in Florida and wanted to sell quickly to avoid the hassle of maintaining the property long distance." Florida, a retirement community. I'd never even been to Florida, and at 58, I was hardly ready for a retirement home. The audacity of the lie took my breath away. "They had all the proper documentation," the husband added, his voice gentle but firm. "Power of attorney, property deed, everything looked legitimate. We dealt with a real estate attorney. This was completely legal." Power of attorney. The phrase made my stomach lurch. I remembered signing those papers 2 years ago when I'd had surgery to remove my appendix. It was supposed to be a precaution, allowing my children to make medical and financial decisions if something went wrong during the procedure. I'd trusted them completely, never imagining they'd use that legal authority to steal my life out from under me. "I'm so sorry," the wife said, her face flushed with embarrassment. "We had no idea. They seemed so nice, so concerned about getting their mother's affairs in order quickly. Sarah even cried when she talked about how hard it was to let go of the family home." Sarah had cried. My daughter, who hadn't shed a tear at her father's funeral because she said she needed to be strong for everyone else, had cried crocodile tears to manipulate these innocent people into buying my stolen house. "Where are my things?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "My furniture, my photos, my husband's books." Another uncomfortable exchange of glances. "They said they'd already moved everything to your new place in Florida," the husband said. "Sarah mentioned that you'd been very particular about what you wanted to keep, so they'd taken care of packing everything personally." Of course they had. I could picture it now, my children rifling through my belongings, deciding what was worth keeping and what could be discarded, sorting through the accumulated treasures of my adult life like they were cleaning out a garage sale. My wedding dress, still hanging in the back of my closet in case Jessica ever wanted to wear it. Daniel's guitar, the one he'd played to serenade me when we were young. The hand-carved jewelry box he'd made for my 30th birthday. All of it. Gone, scattered to the winds or thrown away like garbage. I must have swayed on my feet because the woman reached out to steady me. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit down? Can we call someone for you?" Call someone. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people I would normally call in a crisis were the very ones who'd orchestrated it. "I'm fine," I lied, though I was anything but. I'm sorry to have bothered you. Enjoy your new home." I stumbled back to the rental car, ignoring their concerned calls behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally started, I drove away without looking back. Though I could see the couple standing in the driveway in my rearview mirror, probably calling the police to report a mentally unstable woman harassing them. I drove aimlessly, through my old neighborhood, past Mrs. Patterson's house where she was working in her garden, past the elementary school where all 3 of my children had learned to read, past the park where we'd had countless family picnics when they were small. Everything looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. I was a tourist in my own life, no longer belonging anywhere. My phone, which I'd finally turned on after retrieving it from my purse, immediately started buzzing with missed calls and text messages. Dozens of them, spanning the past 5 days. I pulled into the parking lot of the grocery store where I'd shopped for over 2 decades and forced myself to look at them. The earliest messages were from Sarah, 3 days ago. "Mom, hope you're having fun. Call when you get a chance." "Mom, tried calling but it went straight to voicemail. Nothing urgent, just checking in." "Mom, please call when you get this. Need to talk to you about something important." Then Michael. "Hey Mom, hope the cruise is amazing. Call me when you can." "Mom, Sarah said she's been trying to reach you. Give one of us a call." "Mom, this is important. Please call as soon as you get this." And finally, Jessica, her messages becoming increasingly frantic. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" "Mom, Sarah told me what happened. Please call me back." "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were going to do this. Please, please call me. Mom, I'm scared. Michael and Sarah aren't telling me where you are. Are you okay?" So Jessica hadn't been in on it. My youngest, my baby, was as shocked as I was. The knowledge should have been comforting, but instead, it just added another layer of betrayal. Sarah and Michael had not only stolen from me, they'd excluded their own sister from their conspiracy. I scrolled through to the most recent messages, all from this morning. Sarah. "Mom, I know you're upset, but we can explain everything. We did this for your own good." Michael. "Mom, please let us know you're safe. We're worried sick." Sarah. "Mom, the house needed too much work. The roof, the foundation, the electrical system. We saved you from a financial disaster." Michael. "We put the money in a trust for you. Every penny is safe. We just need to talk." Sarah. "Mom, you're scaring us. Please just call and let us know you're okay." For my own good. They'd stolen my house for my own good. The patronizing tone of Sarah's messages made my blood boil. These were the children I'd sacrificed everything for. The ones I'd worked 60-hour weeks to support. The ones whose college tuition I'd paid even when it meant eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. I tried calling Sarah first, my hands still trembling as I dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail, her cheerful voice instructing me to leave a message and she'd get back to me as soon as possible. The casual normalcy of her greeting, recorded long before this betrayal, made me want to scream. "Sarah, this is your mother." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm sitting in the parking lot of Miller's Grocery, looking at the empty lot where my house used to be. "Call me back immediately." Michael's phone also went to voicemail. I left a similar message, though my voice was getting steadier as my shock began to transform into rage. Jessica answered on the first ring. "Mom? Oh, thank God, Mom. Are you okay? I've been so worried. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were planning. They told me you'd decided to sell and move to Florida. And by the time I realized what was really happening, it was too late." Her voice was thick with tears, and despite my anger, my heart went out to her. She was still my baby, even at 26, and hearing her distress activated every maternal instinct I possessed. "Where are you, sweetheart?" "I'm at work, but I can leave. Where are you? Are you somewhere safe?" I looked around the familiar parking lot, at the store where I'd bought birthday cakes and Halloween costumes and countless gallons of milk over the years. Safe seemed like a relative concept at the moment. "I'm in Millfield, at Miller's Grocery. Jessica, where are my things? Where's Dad's guitar? My wedding dress? The photo albums?" A sob escaped her. "Mom, I don't know. Sarah said they'd put everything in storage until you got settled in your new place." I believed them. God, I'm so stupid. I should have questioned it more. "This isn't your fault, honey. You trusted your siblings, just like I did." "But I should have called you. I should have insisted on talking to you before they did anything. I just thought it was weird that you'd make such a big decision while you were on vacation. But Sarah said you'd called her and asked them to handle everything." More lies. The web of deception my eldest children had woven was breathtaking in its scope. They'd not only betrayed me, they'd manipulated their own sister into being an unwitting accomplice. "Jessica, I need you to listen to me carefully. I never told them to sell the house. I never agreed to move to Florida. I never gave them permission to do any of this." Silence on the other end, followed by another sob. "Oh God, Mom. What do we do now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did we do now? I was 58 years old, homeless, with nothing but a suitcase full of cruise clothes and a rental car that needed to be returned by tomorrow. My children had stolen not just my house, but my entire identity, my history, my sense of belonging in the world. "I don't know yet, baby, but I'm going to figure it out. Can you meet me somewhere? I need to see you." "Yes, of course. There's a coffee shop called Sunrise Cafe on Main Street near the library. Can you meet me there in an hour?" "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat in the car for another few minutes, trying to wrap my mind around the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't just theft. It was a complete erasure of my existence. Every physical reminder of my life with Daniel, every memento of my children's childhoods, every photograph and keepsake that connected me to my past had been ripped away while I was gone. But even worse than the material loss was the emotional betrayal. Sarah and Michael, the children I'd loved and supported and trusted above all others, had looked at my life and decided it was worth nothing more than a quick sale. They'd reduced decades of memories, years of careful homemaking, a lifetime of accumulated treasures, to a simple real estate transaction. The worst part was the lies they'd told to justify it. The story about the retirement community in Florida painted me as a woman who'd made a rational decision to downsize and simplify her life. But the reality was that they'd made that decision for me, without my knowledge or consent, because they'd decided I was too old, too incompetent, or too much of a burden to manage my own affairs. I started the car and drove slowly through Millfield's downtown area, past the library where I'd taken the kids for story time when they were small, past the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated the end of every school year, past the medical practice where I'd worked for 15 years before taking my current job at the regional hospital. The town was the same, but I was different now. I was a stranger in my own life, cut adrift from everything that had anchored me. The Sunrise Cafe was busy with the late afternoon crowd, but I spotted Jessica immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, and her expression crumpled. "Mom," she whispered, standing to embrace me. I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling some of the tension in my body ease slightly. At least I still had one child who was truly mine. "I'm so sorry," she said into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I should have known something was wrong." "Shh," I murmured, stroking her hair the way I had when she was little and woke up from nightmares. "This isn't your fault." We sat down across from each other, and Jessica immediately launched into a detailed account of the past 2 weeks. Sarah had called her 3 days after I'd left, explaining that I'd called from the ship and asked them to put the house on the market immediately. She said you'd been thinking about it for months but hadn't wanted to worry us, Jessica explained, twisting a napkin between her fingers. She said you'd found a beautiful retirement community in Sarasota with a golf course and a pool, and you wanted to move there before the winter. It sounded so unlike you, but Sarah was so convincing. She had all these details about the place, about how you'd already put down a deposit. Did you ever think to call me and ask? Jessica's face crumpled again. I tried, but Sarah said you were having such a good time on the cruise that you'd asked not to be bothered with the details. She said you trusted us to handle everything and just wanted to enjoy your vacation. And honestly, Mom, part of me thought it might be good for you. The house is so big, and you're there all alone, and it needs so much work. The word stung, even though I knew she meant well. Was that how my children saw me? As a lonely old woman rattling around in a house too big for her? Too incompetent to maintain her own property? Jessica, that house wasn't just a building to me. It was where you kids grew up. It was where your father and I were happy. It was filled with 30 years of memories. I know, she said miserably. I realized that as soon as Sarah told me, it was already sold. I asked her what happened to all your things, and she got really vague. She just kept saying everything was taken care of, that you'd given them detailed instructions about what to keep and what to donate. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her. It was easier than thinking that my own sister would lie to me about something so important. I reached across the table and took her hand. Tell me exactly what happened. Step by step. Jessica took a shaky breath and began to recount the timeline. Sarah had contacted a real estate agent the day after I left for my cruise. Using the power of attorney I'd signed 2 years ago, she'd listed the house as a quick sale, pricing it below market value to ensure a fast transaction. The young couple I'd met had made an offer within 2 days, and Sarah had accepted immediately. Michael handled all the paperwork, Jessica continued. He's got connections at the bank from his job, so he was able to expedite everything. They closed last Friday, just 5 days after you left. 5 days. My entire life had been dismantled in 5 days. And the movers? They came on Saturday. Sarah supervised everything. She said you'd given her a detailed list of what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. I offered to help, but she said you'd specifically asked that only she and Michael handle it, that it would be too emotional for me. Another lie, designed to keep Jessica away from the scene of the crime. My eldest children had thought of everything, crafting their deception with surgical precision. Jessica, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have Sarah and Michael been having financial problems? She hesitated, and I knew I'd hit on something important. Jessica? Sarah's been stressed about money lately, she admitted reluctantly. Her marketing business has been struggling since the pandemic, and David's hours at the construction company were cut back. They've been behind on their mortgage payments. What about Michael? He and Jennifer just had the baby, and Jennifer's been on unpaid maternity leave. Plus, they bought that big house last year, the one with the pool. Michael's been working overtime, but it's still tight. The picture was becoming clearer. My successful, independent children weren't as financially secure as they'd pretended to be. Sarah's thriving marketing consultancy was failing. Michael's seemingly stable banking job wasn't providing enough income to support his new family and expensive lifestyle. They'd looked at my house and seen a solution to their problems. How much did they sell it for? Jessica pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. Sarah texted me the details when it closed. $420,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. I'd bought the house with Daniel for $85,000 in 1999. Even accounting for the work it needed, it was worth at least $500,000 in today's market. My children had essentially given away $60,000 of my equity to ensure a quick sale. Jessica, that house was my retirement plan. It was my financial security. Without it, I have nothing except my savings account and my pension. But they said they put all the money in a trust for you. Sarah showed me paperwork and everything. A trust that I knew nothing about, controlled by the very people who'd stolen from me. Even if the money was really there, and I was beginning to doubt that, they'd effectively made themselves the guardians of my financial future. I need to see that paperwork, I said. I need to see everything. The sale documents, the trust paperwork, the power of attorney they used. Can you get copies? I think so. Sarah has everything filed in her home office. She's really organized about that stuff. Good. I also need you to help me find a lawyer. Not the one they used for the sale, but someone who specializes in elder abuse. Jessica flinched at the term. Mom, they're not elder abusers. They're your children. They love you. Sweetheart, what they did to me is the textbook definition of financial elder abuse. They used a legal document I signed for emergency medical purposes to steal my home and my financial security. The fact that we share DNA doesn't make it less criminal. I could see the resistance in her eyes, the struggle between loyalty to her siblings, and the growing recognition of what they'd done. It was painful to watch, but necessary. Jessica needed to understand the gravity of the situation, not just for my sake, but for her own protection. If Sarah and Michael were willing to betray me so thoroughly, what would stop them from turning on her when they needed her money or her compliance? I know this is hard, I continued gently. They're your family, and you love them. But what they did was wrong, and I can't just let it go. They've left me homeless, Jessica. I'm 58 years old with nowhere to live and no idea where my possessions are. I can't pretend this is okay just because they're family. Tears streamed down her face as the full weight of the situation hit her. What do you need me to do? I need you to help me get those documents, and I need you to be honest with me about everything you know, even if it makes Sarah and Michael look bad. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the shredded napkin. There's something else. Something I didn't want to tell you. My stomach clenched. What? Last week, before the house sold, I drove by to check on things like you asked. The lawn was getting long, and I thought maybe Michael had forgotten to mow it. But when I got there was a dumpster in the driveway, and Sarah was throwing things away. What kind of things? I don't know exactly. She saw me and came over really quickly, said she was just cleaning out the garage and basement like you'd asked her to do. But Mom, I saw her throw away a box of Christmas ornaments, the ones we made when we were kids. The Christmas ornaments. Each year, Daniel and I had helped the children make new decorations for the tree. Popsicle stick angels and construction paper stars and painted pine cones collected from our backyard. I'd saved every single one, treasuring them as reminders of magical childhood Christmases when the house was filled with laughter and excitement. She threw them in the dumpster? When I asked her about it, she said you'd told her to get rid of all the old holiday decorations because your new place would be decorated for you. She said you wanted a fresh start. A fresh start. As if 30 years of carefully curated memories were clutter to be discarded. What else did you see her throw away? I don't know. She asked me to go inside and water the plants while she finished up outside. By the time I came back out, the dumpster was covered with a tarp. I closed my eyes, trying not to imagine what other irreplaceable mementos had been casually discarded. Daniel's books, probably. My mother's recipe cards. The children's artwork and school projects I'd saved. Photo albums that hadn't made the cut for the digitized versions. All of it gone, rotting in some landfill while I'd been watching whales breach in Alaskan waters. Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you think this was really about helping me, or do you think they needed the money? She was quiet for a long time, staring. into her coffee cup. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of pain. "I think they needed the money," she whispered. "I think they saw an opportunity when you went on the cruise, and they took it. I don't think they meant to hurt you, but I think they convinced themselves that what was good for them was good for you too." It was the admission I'd been expecting, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. My children had stolen from me not out of concern for my welfare, but out of concern for their own financial problems. They'd used my absence and their power of attorney to solve their money troubles at my expense, then crafted an elaborate lie to make themselves feel better about it. "Mom, what are you going to do?" I looked around the coffee shop, at the familiar faces of neighbors and acquaintances, at the community bulletin board covered with flyers for yard sales and lost cats and church suppers. This was my town, my home, the place where I'd built a life and raised a family. But I no longer belonged here. My anchor had been cut, and I was drifting in unfamiliar waters. "I'm going to get my life back," I said finally. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to figure it out." As I drove to a nearby hotel that night, my rental car packed with everything I owned in the world, I tried to process the enormity of what lay ahead. I needed to find a lawyer, obviously. I needed to track down my possessions, assuming any of them still existed. I needed to figure out where I was going to live and how I was going to rebuild a life that had been demolished while I was gone. But underneath the practical concerns was a deeper reckoning. The people I'd trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. They'd stolen not just my house and my belongings, but my sense of security, my faith in family bonds, my belief that love was enough to protect me from harm. The hotel room was sterile and anonymous, nothing like the warm, lived-in space I'd called home for 23 years. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my vacation clothes, and tried to imagine what Daniel would say if he could see me now. He'd always believed the best of people, especially our children. Would he make excuses for them the way Jessica was trying to do? Or would he be as devastated as I was by their betrayal? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the vacation photos I'd taken just days ago. There I was, smiling broadly in front of a glacier, arms spread wide to encompass the vastness of the landscape. I looked happy, relaxed, younger than I'd looked in years. The woman in those photos had no idea that her life was being systematically destroyed while she posed for pictures and made friends with strangers. But looking at those images now, I realized something important. That happy woman was still me. Sarah and Michael might have stolen my house and my possessions, but they couldn't steal my spirit unless I let them. I was the same woman who'd raised 3 children alone after losing her husband. I was the same woman who'd worked her way through nurse practitioner school while managing a household and a full-time job. I was the same woman who'd survived cancer scares and financial struggles and teenage rebellion and 1,000 other challenges. I was stronger than they'd counted on, and I was going to prove it. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. Attorney Patricia Hoffman was a sharp-faced woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen too many family betrayals to be shocked by mine. She reviewed the documents Jessica had managed to obtain from Sarah's files, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Mrs. Chen," she said, setting the papers down on her mahogany desk. "What your children did was legal, technically speaking. The power of attorney you signed gives them broad authority over your financial affairs. The fact that it was intended for medical emergencies doesn't change its legal validity." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "So there's nothing I can do?" I didn't say that. Patricia leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Legal and ethical are 2 different things, and legal and recoverable are also 2 different things. The question is whether we can prove they acted outside the scope of your intended authorization and whether they used the proceeds for their own benefit rather than yours." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes, Tell me about this trust they allegedly established with the sale proceeds. I handed her the trust documents Jessica had photographed with her phone. Sarah had been surprisingly thorough in creating what appeared to be a legitimate trust fund, complete with official letterhead and legal language I couldn't fully understand. Patricia studied the papers for several minutes, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. This is interesting. Very interesting. What? Well, they did establish a trust, but they named themselves as trustees. That means they control when and how you can access your own money. According to these terms, you can receive a maximum of $3,000 per month for living expenses, and any larger withdrawals require unanimous approval from both trustees. The room seemed to tilt around me. $3,000? The mortgage on that house was only $1,800. My living expenses were nowhere near $3,000 a month. Exactly. They've effectively put you on an allowance from your own money. And look at this clause here. She pointed to a dense paragraph near the bottom of the document. If you challenge the trust or the sale of the property, the monthly payments can be suspended pending resolution of the dispute. My hands began to shake. They're holding my own money hostage. It appears so. They've created a system where fighting them could leave you with no income at all, while compliance guarantees you enough to survive, but not enough to rebuild your independence. I thought about Sarah's marketing business struggling to stay afloat, about Michael's expensive house and new baby. $3,000 a month from my trust would be a significant boost to their own household budgets, especially if they were skimming from the principal or charging themselves management fees. What about my belongings? My furniture? My photo albums? My husband's things? Patricia consulted another set of documents. According to the estate sale receipts Jessica provided, most of your personal property was sold to a liquidation company for $3,700. The buyer was required to remove everything within 48 hours of the house closing. $3,700. 30 years of accumulated possessions, memories, and irreplaceable mementos sold in bulk like surplus inventory. I thought of Daniel's guitar, probably hanging in some stranger's music room now. My wedding dress, maybe cut up for fabric or thrown away if it wasn't worth reselling. My children's baby photos, scattered to the wind or moldering in a landfill. Did they keep anything? There's a storage unit listed here, paid for 6 months in advance. Unit 247 at Secure Store on Industrial Boulevard. That's probably where they put whatever they deemed worth preserving. A storage unit. My entire history reduced to whatever could fit in a rented metal box. My most precious possessions judged worthy of preservation by the same children who'd stolen everything else. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your relationship with your children, particularly in the months leading up to your vacation. I shifted uncomfortably in the stiff leather chair. What kind of questions? Had they expressed concerns about your ability to maintain the house, your financial management, your health or mental capacity? The questions felt like accusations, even though I knew Patricia was just doing her job. Nothing specific. Sarah occasionally mentioned that the house was getting old and might need expensive repairs. Michael worried about me living alone, especially after I had that bout with pneumonia last winter. Did they ever suggest you might be better off in a smaller place? A retirement community? I thought back over the past year, trying to remember conversations I'd dismissed as casual concern at the time. Sarah did bring up a retirement community once. She'd driven past one of those active senior developments and mentioned how nice it looked, how convenient it would be to have maintenance, and activities all included. But it was just conversation. I never expressed any interest in moving. Patricia made more notes. What about finances? Did they have access to your bank accounts or investment information? No, absolutely not. I handle my own finances. Always have. But even as I said it, I remembered the times Michael had helped me set up online banking, the occasions when Sarah had offered to review my investment portfolio to make sure I was getting good returns. I'd appreciated their concern then, saw it as evidence of their love and responsibility. Now I wondered what information they'd gathered during those helpful sessions. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to be frank with you. This is going to be a difficult case. Your children have been very careful to make their actions appear legitimate. They have documentation showing concern for your welfare, evidence of the house needing repairs, records of your own power of attorney authorizing them to act on your behalf. Any court proceeding will essentially come down to your word against theirs about your mental state and intentions. Are you saying I should just accept this? Let them get away with stealing my life? I'm saying we need to be strategic. The trust agreement includes provisions for mediation before any legal action can be taken. I'd recommend we start there. It's less expensive than litigation, and it might reveal information about their true motivations and financial situation. Less expensive. Everything came down to money in the end, even justice. I thought about my modest savings account, already depleted by lawyer consultations and hotel bills. How long could I afford to fight my own children for the right to my own property? What are the chances of success if we go to mediation? Patricia hesitated, and I knew the answer wouldn't be encouraging. If they're truly concerned about your welfare and the money is really being held for your benefit, mediation might result in modifications to the trust terms or some return of your personal property. If they needed the money for their own purposes and have already spent it, they'll fight any changes vigorously. And if we can't reach an agreement in mediation, then we file suit for financial elder abuse, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of property. It could take years to resolve, and legal fees could easily consume whatever we might recover. I left Patricia's office feeling more defeated than when I'd arrived. The legal system that was supposed to protect people like me seemed designed to protect people like my children instead. They'd found a legal loophole that allowed them to steal everything I owned while appearing to act in my best interests. The hotel was becoming depressingly familiar. I'd been there for 5 days now, living out of my cruise suitcase and eating takeout meals while I tried to figure out what to do next. The cheerful vacation clothes that had seemed so perfect for Alaskan adventures looked ridiculous in the gray October weather of Millfield. I needed winter clothing, but I was afraid to spend money on anything beyond basic necessities until I knew how long my savings would need to last. Jessica called while I was picking at a sad Caesar salad from the hotel restaurant. "Mom, how did it go with the lawyer?" I gave her a sanitized version of Patricia's assessment, leaving out the most discouraging details. Jessica was struggling enough with guilt over her siblings' actions without me burdening her with the futility of fighting them. "I talked to Sarah again today," Jessica said hesitantly. "I asked her about the storage unit and your personal things. What did she say?" "She said she saved everything that mattered. All your photo albums, Dad's guitar, your jewelry, important documents. She said she had to make quick decisions about what to keep and what to let go, but she tried to preserve anything with sentimental value." I wanted to believe this was true, but Sarah's definition of sentimental value might be very different from mine. Would she have saved my mother's handwritten recipes? The ceramic vase Daniel had bought me on our honeymoon? The children's report? Cards and artwork I'd carefully filed away? Did she give you the key to the storage unit? She said she'd meet us there tomorrow afternoon. She wants to show you everything she saved and explain her decisions. The prospect of facing Sarah filled me with a mixture of anger and dread. I hadn't spoken to her directly since returning from my cruise, communicating only through Jessica or terse text messages about practical matters. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation for her betrayal. But a larger part of me was afraid of what I might say or do when I saw her face. Will Michael be there? I don't think so. Sarah said he's been working a lot of overtime lately. Overtime to help pay for the house they'd bought with my money, no doubt. The irony wasn't lost on me that my children were working extra hours to afford the lifestyle they'd purchased by stealing my security. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the conversation I'd have with Sarah tomorrow. What could she possibly say to justify what she'd done? What explanation could make sense of stealing someone's entire life while they were on vacation? I tried to imagine the moment when she'd made the decision. Had it been premeditated, planned, before I even left for my cruise? Or had it been an impulse, triggered by some financial crisis that made my empty house look like an opportunity too good to pass up? I thought about the power of attorney document I'd signed so casually 2 years. The doctor had recommended it as a standard precaution before surgery, something every responsible adult should have in place. I'd trusted my children completely, never imagining they'd use that trust as a weapon against me. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to occupy myself with practical tasks, calling my insurance company to update my address, researching apartments I couldn't afford, looking up legal aid societies that might offer free assistance. But everything felt pointless until I knew what resources I actually had available. At 2 o'clock, I drove to the storage facility on Industrial Boulevard. It was a sprawling complex of identical metal buildings, the kind of place where people stored Christmas decorations and exercise equipment they never used. Jessica's car was already in the parking lot, along with Sarah's familiar blue Honda. My eldest daughter was waiting by Unit 247, her arms crossed over her chest in a defensive posture I remembered from her teenage years. She looked older than her 31 years, stress evident in the lines around her eyes and the tight set of her mouth. For a moment, I felt a stab of maternal concern before remembering why we were here. "Hello, Mom," she said quietly as I approached. "You look good." Rested. The casual greeting, as if we were meeting for lunch instead of sorting through the wreckage of my life, made my jaw clench. Sarah. Jessica hovered between us, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Should we open it up and see what's inside? Sarah produced a key from her purse and rolled up the metal door. The unit was about 10 feet by 12 feet, packed with cardboard boxes, furniture covered in blankets, and several larger items I recognized immediately. Daniel's guitar case was propped against one wall, along with his bookshelf and the antique rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother. I stepped inside, my heart hammering as I began to identify the contents. The boxes were labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting: Mom's photo albums, kitchen dishes, Dad's books, Mom's jewelry. At least she'd been organized in her theft. "I saved everything I thought you'd want," Sarah said, her voice defensive. "I know you're angry about the house, but I really did try to preserve what mattered." I opened the box labeled Photo. Albums, and found them all there, every leather-bound volume I'd carefully maintained over the years. Wedding photos, baby pictures, family vacations, school portraits spanning 3 decades. Seeing them brought a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. What about my Christmas ornaments, the ones the kids made when they were little? Sarah's face fell. "I'm sorry. I thought those were just old craft projects. I didn't realize they were important to you." Jessica made a small sound of distress. "Sarah, I told you those mattered to Mom. I saw you throwing them away." There were so many boxes of holiday decorations. I couldn't keep everything. I saved the nice ornaments, the Waterford crystal ones, and the antique angels. The expensive ornaments meant nothing to me compared to the handmade treasures my children had created with such pride. Those crude angels and lopsided stars had been my favorite decorations, lovingly displayed on the tree every year while the perfect store-bought ornament stayed in their tissue paper. What about my recipe cards? My mother's recipes? I threw those away. You never cook anymore and everything's online now anyway. My mother's recipes, written in her careful script on index cards yellowed with age. Gone. The handwritten instructions for her famous apple pie and her secret spaghetti sauce, discarded like junk mail because my daughter couldn't imagine why anyone would want to preserve such antiquated things. I moved through the storage unit methodically, taking inventory of what had been deemed worth saving versus what had been carelessly discarded. My jewelry was there, including my engagement ring and the pearls Daniel had given me for our 10th anniversary. My good china had been preserved, along with the silver serving pieces I'd inherited from my grandmother, but the everyday items that had made the house feel like home were gone. The coffee mug Daniel had used every morning, chipped and stained but irreplaceable. The wooden spoons I'd used to stir countless pots of soup and sauce. The quilt my mother had made for our first apartment, worn thin but still carrying the scent of her lavender sachets. "I know it's not everything," Sarah said, watching me sort through the boxes. "But I had to make quick decisions. The estate sale company only gave me 2 days to clear out what I wanted to keep. You had no right to make those decisions at all," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "This wasn't your house to sell or your belongings to dispose of. Mom, you don't understand the position we were in. The house needed so much work. The roof was leaking, the foundation had cracks, the electrical system was 50 years old. You were looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs. So you decided to sell it without asking me. We tried to call you, but you weren't answering your phone. And we knew if we waited for you to come back, we'd lose the buyers. They wanted a quick closing." The lies came so easily to her, even now when there was no point in pretending. She'd called me once during the entire cruise, and that conversation had been entirely social. There had been no mention of house problems or potential buyers or any need for urgent decisions. "Sarah, stop lying to me. You know as well as I do that you never tried to reach me about selling the house. You made that decision while I was gone because you knew I would never agree to it." Her defensive mask slipped, revealing something desperate underneath. "You're right. We should have asked. But Mom, we were desperate. David lost his job 2 months ago, and we're 3 payments behind on our mortgage. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Finally, the truth. Not concern for my welfare or the condition of my house, but their own financial crisis. My home had been sacrificed to save theirs. What about Michael? What was his excuse? Jennifer's maternity leave was unpaid and they're drowning in medical. Bills from the pregnancy complications. The baby was in the NICU for 2 weeks. Their insurance didn't cover everything. More financial desperation. Both of my successful, independent children had been living beyond their means, and when reality caught up with them, they'd decided to solve their problems with my money. So you saw my cruise as an opportunity." Sarah's face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We thought we'd sell the house, put most of the money aside for you, and use just enough to get back on our feet. Then we'd help you find a nice retirement community where you'd be happier and safer." Without asking what I wanted. Without considering that the house was my home, not just an asset to be liquidated when convenient. "You're 58. Mom, you don't need a 4-bedroom house with a big yard to maintain, and you're alone there. What if something happened? What if you fell or had a heart attack? None of us live close enough to check on you regularly." The patronizing tone, the assumption that age 58 made me incapable of living independently, fueled my anger. "I'm not some helpless old woman, Sarah. I work full-time as a nurse practitioner. I maintain my own home and my own finances. I don't need my children making decisions about my life behind my back." "But you do need us," she said, tears starting to flow. "You need family support and financial security. That house was eating up your resources with maintenance and repairs. The money from the sale, properly invested, will provide much better security for your future. The money that you and Michael control. The money that you've put in a trust that gives me $3,000 a month like an allowance." Sarah had the grace to look ashamed. The trust was Michael's idea. He said it would protect you from making impulsive financial decisions and ensure the money lasted for your lifetime. Or ensure that you and Michael could benefit from managing my money while keeping me dependent on your approval for any significant expenses. We stood in the storage unit, surrounded by the remnants of my life, the air thick with accusation and justification. Jessica had retreated to the entrance, clearly overwhelmed by the confrontation between her mother and sister. "Mom, I know you're angry, but we really were trying to help. The house was too much for you, even if you won't admit it. You needed to downsize anyway. We just helped make it happen." The condescension in her voice, the absolute certainty that she knew what was best for me, crystallized something in my mind. This wasn't just about money or the house. It was about power and respect, and my children's fundamental belief that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. "Sarah, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am not too old or too incompetent to manage my own life. I am not confused or impaired or in need of your protection. I am a functioning adult who was robbed by her own children while she was on vacation. And I am not going to pretend this was done for my benefit just to make you feel better about what you've done." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "We're still your children. We still love you. This doesn't have to destroy our family." "You destroyed our family when you decided to steal from me. Love doesn't justify theft, Sarah. Family doesn't give you the right to betray someone's trust." I turned to Jessica, who was crying silently near the storage unit entrance. "I need you to help me move these things somewhere safe, somewhere your siblings can't access them. Where will you put them? You don't have a place yet." That was the problem, wasn't it? I was homeless, living in a hotel with no permanent address and no idea where I'd be next month. The storage unit, for all its painful associations, was at least secure and climate-controlled. "I'll keep paying for this unit for now," I decided. "But I want the lock changed and new keys made. Can you help me with that?" Jessica nodded. "Of course." Sarah looked stricken. "Mom, you don't have to shut us out completely. We can work together to fix this." "No, Sarah. You made your choice when you sold my house without my permission. Now you have to live with the consequences of that choice, just like I do." I spent another hour in the storage unit, going through boxes and making lists of what was there versus what I remembered from the house. The losses were staggering. 40 years of accumulated possessions reduced to what would fit in a 10 by 12 space, with the most meaningful items often missing. As we prepared to leave, Sarah made one final attempt at reconciliation. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear this right now, but we really do have your best interests at heart. The retirement community we looked at in Florida is beautiful. It has a golf course and a pool and activities every day. You'd make friends. You'd be safe. You could start fresh." "Sarah, I don't want to start fresh. I want my life back. I want my house and my belongings and my independence. I want the family I thought I had, the children I thought I could trust. But that's gone now, isn't it?" She had no answer for that. We drove away in separate cars, leaving the storage unit behind like a mausoleum for my former life. I knew Sarah would probably call Jessica later, trying to get her to mediate or convince me to be reasonable. But I was done being reasonable. Reasonable people didn't steal their mother's house while she was on vacation. That evening, I sat in my hotel room with a legal pad, making lists of everything I needed to do. Find a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse. Get copies of all the financial documents related to the house sale and trust. Research my rights regarding power of attorney abuse. Find a place to live that I could afford on $3,000 a month until I could regain control of my own money. But underneath the practical concerns was a deeper reckoning. I had to accept that the family I'd thought I had was an illusion. The children I'd raised and loved and trusted had been capable of betraying me in the most fundamental way possible. They'd stolen not just my house and my possessions, but my faith in the bonds that were supposed to protect us from harm. The woman who'd gone on that cruise 2 weeks ago would have been devastated by this knowledge. She would have blamed herself, wondered what she'd done wrong, searched for ways to restore harmony and forgiveness. But that woman had died somewhere between the cruise ship and the empty lot where her house used to be. The woman sitting in this hotel room was someone new, someone who understood that love without respect was worthless, someone who wouldn't accept betrayal in the name of family loyalty, someone who was going to fight for what was rightfully hers, regardless of the cost or the consequences. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Hoffman's office, leaving a message that I wanted to proceed with mediation as soon as possible. Then I called the storage facility and arranged to have the lock changed first thing in the morning. My children had started this war when they sold my house. Now they were going to discover that their mild-mannered mother was capable of fighting back in ways they'd never imagined. The first few apartments I looked at were depressing, the kind of places where hope went to die. Beige walls, thin carpeting that smelled of other people's disappointments, windows that faced brick walls or parking lots. The rental agent, a tired-looking woman named Carol who seemed to view apartment hunting as a necessary evil, showed me through unit after unit of identical mediocrity. "This one has updated appliances," she said, opening the door to a cramped kitchen with a refrigerator that hummed loudly enough to drown out conversation. "And the rent includes water and sewer." I stood in the middle of the living room, which was barely large enough for a couch and coffee table, and tried to imagine myself living there, waking up every morning to beige walls and the sound of traffic from the busy street outside, eating solitary dinners at a card table because there wasn't room for proper dining furniture, growing old in a space that felt like a waiting room for the afterlife. "I'd like to see something else," I said politely. Carol sighed and consulted her tablet. "Well, there's a 2-bedroom in the Riverside Gardens complex, but it's probably out of your price range. $800 a month plus utilities." $800 was more than I'd been planning to spend, but the name intrigued me. "Let's take a look." The drive to Riverside Gardens took us through a part of town I'd rarely visited, an older neighborhood where mature trees lined quiet streets and small houses sat on generous lots. The apartment complex was a converted Victorian mansion, painted soft yellow with white trim and surrounded by actual gardens, rather than the standard foundation plantings most rental properties featured. "The owner lives in the main house," Carol explained as we pulled into the circular driveway. She converted the carriage house and guest cottage into rental units. Very particular about her tenants, though. Wants references, background checks, the whole 9 yards. The apartment was the upper floor of the carriage house, accessed by an external staircase that led to a small covered porch. Inside, hardwood floors gleamed under tall windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. The kitchen was compact but charming, with vintage tile and cabinets that had been lovingly restored rather than simply updated. The bedroom was spacious enough for real furniture, and the bathroom featured an old claw-foot tub that made me think of long, luxurious soaks. But it was the living room that sold me. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the garden, where late-season roses still bloomed, and a fountain provided the sound of running water. I could see myself reading there in the mornings, drinking coffee while watching birds at the feeder hanging from an ancient oak tree. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. Carol looked surprised. "Don't you want to know about the lease terms? The deposit requirements?" "I want to meet the owner first. If she approves me as a tenant, I'll take it." Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield was 73 years old, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and the kind of presence that suggested she'd been beautiful her entire life. She invited me into her parlor, a room that belonged in a magazine spread about gracious living, and served tea from delicate china cups while asking questions that had nothing to do with my credit score or employment history. "Tell me about yourself, dear. What brought you to apartment hunting at this stage of your life?" I found myself telling her the truth, or at least an abbreviated version of it. My husband had died 8 years ago. I'd recently experienced a major life change that required starting over. I was looking for a place to rebuild and reinvent myself. "And what would rebuilding look like for you?" she asked, her blue eyes sharp with intelligence. "I'm not entirely sure yet. I know I want to grow things again. I had a garden for 23 years, and I miss having my hands in the soil. I'd like to take some classes, maybe learn something I've always been curious about but never had time for. I want to travel more, see places I've only read about." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "The garden is open to all my tenants. Feel free to claim a section and make it your own. And the location is convenient to the university if you're interested in auditing classes." She asked about my work, my interests, my philosophy of life. We talked about books and gardening and the challenges of aging gracefully in a culture that worshipped youth. By the time I left, I felt like I'd made a friend rather than simply passed a rental application screening. "The apartment is yours if you want it," she said as she walked me to the door. "I have a feeling you're exactly the kind of person who would appreciate living here." I moved in 2 weeks later, using part of my settlement money to buy furniture that reflected my own taste, rather than compromise decisions made with a husband's preferences in mind. Instead of the heavy, traditional pieces that had filled my house with Daniel, I chose lighter, more modern furniture in colors that made me happy. A sage green sofa for the living room, a round dining table that encouraged intimate conversations, rather than formal meals. A bed with a wrought iron headboard that reminded me of European hotels I'd seen in movies. The physical act of creating a new space was surprisingly therapeutic. Each decision, from the paint color for the bedroom walls to the style of curtains for the kitchen window, was entirely my own. No one else's opinion mattered. No one else's needs had to be considered. For the first time since Daniel died, I was designing a life that belonged completely to me. Jessica helped me move the important items from the storage unit, bringing them up the narrow staircase piece by piece until my new home contained the essential remnants of my old life. Daniel's guitar found a place of honor on a stand near the window, ready to be played again if I ever worked up the courage to relearn the songs we used to sing together. My photo albums lined the shelves I'd installed in the bedroom, close enough to look through whenever nostalgia struck, but not so prominent that they dominated the space. "It's beautiful, Mom," Jessica said, settling onto the new sofa with a cup of tea. "It feels like you." It did feel like me, though I was still discovering exactly who that was. The woman who'd lived in the house on Elmwood Drive had been defined by her relationships. Daniel's wife, Sarah and Michael, and Jessica's mother. The reliable neighbor who brought casseroles when someone was sick and organized block parties every summer. This new woman was still forming, still experimenting with ways of being that didn't require external validation. I'd started taking art classes at the community college, something I'd always wanted to try but had never prioritized when my time belonged to everyone else. The instructor, a patient man named Professor Martinez who treated his continuing education students with the same respect he showed his degree-seeking ones, encouraged me to explore different mediums and find my own style. "Art isn't about talent," he said during my first pottery class as I struggled with a lump of clay that refused to become the bowl I'd envisioned. "It's about expression. Don't worry about making something beautiful. Focus on making something that's authentically yours." The pottery wheel became my meditation. Something about the rhythm of the spinning clay and the feel of earth between my fingers connected me to parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. My early attempts were disasters. Lopsided vessels that collapsed or cracked in the kiln. But gradually, my hands learned to guide the clay with confidence, creating simple forms that pleased me even if they weren't technically perfect. I also signed up for a photography course, inspired by the pictures I'd taken during my cruise, and wanting to learn how to see the world through a camera lens with more intention. The instructor emphasized composition and light, teaching us to notice details we might otherwise overlook. Walking through Millfield with my camera, I began to see my hometown differently. the way morning light hit the old courthouse steps. The intricate patterns in Victorian ironwork I'd passed 1,000 times without really seeing. The faces of people going about their daily lives, each one carrying stories I'd never bothered to wonder about. The photography assignments took me to places I'd never explored despite living in the area for 3 decades. The historic district with its carefully preserved buildings and informative plaques. The nature preserve on the edge of town where walking trails wound through wetlands filled with migrating birds. The farmers' market downtown where vendors sold not just produce but handmade crafts and local honey and fresh flowers that made perfect subjects for still life studies. Each new experience was like adding color to a painting that had been rendered in shades of gray for too long. I was rediscovering wonder, the simple pleasure of learning something new or seeing something beautiful. The woman who'd been Sarah and Michael's mother would have felt guilty about spending time and money on herself. The woman I was becoming saw such pursuits as essential rather than selfish. My relationship with Jessica continued to evolve as, well, without the dynamic of family gatherings dominated by Sarah and Michael, we were free to develop a connection based on who we actually were, rather than our assigned roles. She came for dinner every few weeks, and we talked about her job as a graphic designer, her relationship with her boyfriend Tom, her own struggles with finding purpose and meaning in her life. I keep waiting for my life to really start, she confessed one evening as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, like I'm still in some kind of preparation phase and eventually I'll figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. What if this is it? I asked. What if your life has already started and you're living it right now? She considered this, sipping the wine I'd opened to celebrate my first pottery piece that had survived the kiln intact. That's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Most important things are. We talked about Sarah and Michael occasionally, though Jessica was careful not to pressure me about reconciliation. They'd paid back $30,000 of the money they'd taken, though the remaining amount would be paid in installments over several years. Their lawyer had insisted on payment plans that protected them from financial hardship, while giving me no recourse if they defaulted. Sarah asks about you all the time, Jessica told me during one of these conversations. She wants to know how you're doing, where you're living, if you're happy. What do you tell her? The truth, that you're building a new life and seem more content than I've seen you in years. I wondered if that hurt Sarah, knowing that I was thriving without her. Part of me hoped it did. She'd assumed that cutting her out of my life would be a punishment for me, that I'd eventually come crawling back because I needed my family more than my pride. The reality was that her absence was a relief, a removal of constant judgment and manipulation that had been wearing me down for years without my fully realizing it. Michael had made one attempt at contact, calling me on a Tuesday evening about 6 weeks after the mediation. I'd let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with detached curiosity. Mom, it's Michael. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that Jennifer had the baby, a little girl. We named her Elena. She's healthy and beautiful, and I wish you could meet her. I know I messed up with the house thing, but you're still my mother, and Elena is still your granddaughter. Maybe we could work something out. Call me back if you want to talk. The message had stirred complex emotions. Joy that the baby was healthy. Sadness that I was missing this milestone in my family's life. Anger that Michael thought mentioning his daughter would manipulate me into forgiveness. Love for a granddaughter I'd never met, mixed with resentment that my relationship with her was being held hostage to my willingness to overlook her father's betrayal. I didn't call him back. I bought a savings bond in Elena's name and put it in my safe deposit box. But I didn't call. The decision felt both cruel and necessary. If Michael wanted me in his daughter's life, he needed to repair the relationship he'd damaged, not simply expect that grandmotherhood would override my need for respect and accountability. The holidays were approaching, and with them the first real test of my new boundaries. For 30 years, I'd hosted Thanksgiving dinner, spending days planning menus and decorating the house and making sure everyone's favorite dishes were represented. Christmas had been even more elaborate, with traditions accumulated over decades and expectations that had grown heavier each year. This year, I had no obligations except to myself. No turkey to buy or guest rooms to prepare or family dynamics to navigate. The freedom was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Eleanor invited me to join her family's Thanksgiving celebration, but I politely declined. I wanted to experience the holiday as a single person making my own choices, rather than as a grateful recipient of someone else's charity. Instead, I made reservations at a nice restaurant downtown and invited Jessica to join me. "Are you sure you don't want to cook?" she asked. "I could help. We could do something simple, just the two of us." "I've cooked Thanksgiving dinner for 30 years, I replied. "This year I want someone else to handle the cooking while I focus on what I'm actually grateful for." The restaurant was filled with other people who'd opted out of traditional family gatherings. Couples without children, elderly people whose families lived far away, individuals who'd chosen independence over obligation. We were a community of voluntary orphans, and there was something liberating about sharing the holiday with strangers who understood that family wasn't the only source of meaning and connection. "What are you grateful for, Mom?" Jessica asked over our shared appetizer of butternut squash soup. I thought about the question seriously. I'm grateful for discovering who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else needs me to be. I'm grateful for learning that I can survive having my world turned upside down. I'm grateful for clay that responds to gentle pressure and for light that transforms ordinary objects into art. I'm grateful for this balcony where I drink my morning coffee, and for Eleanor's garden where I've planted bulbs that will bloom in the spring. Are you grateful for what happened with Sarah and Michael? I mean, I know it was horrible, but has anything good come from it? The question caught me off guard, but I found myself nodding. In a strange way, yes. I'm grateful that their betrayal forced me to discover my own strength. I'm grateful that losing everything I thought mattered showed me what actually matters. I'm grateful that being abandoned by the people I loved most taught me how to love myself. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm grateful that you're my mother, even when your other children are idiots. We laughed, and I realized that this non-traditional Thanksgiving felt more meaningful than any of the elaborate productions I'd orchestrated in the past. Instead of managing other people's expectations and mediating family tensions, I was present in the moment, focused on genuine gratitude rather than obligation. As autumn turned to winter, I settled more deeply into the rhythms of my new life. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the garden transition from late blooms to dormant beauty. Art classes that challenged me to see and express the world differently. Long walks through neighborhoods I'd never explored, camera in hand to capture moments of unexpected beauty. Evenings reading books I'd always meant to get to, with no one expecting dinner or conversation or attention. The solitude that had once seemed like loneliness revealed itself as spaciousness. Without the constant noise of other people's needs and opinions, I could hear my own thoughts more clearly. I began keeping a journal, writing about my experiences and observations, and the gradual process of becoming someone new. The woman on those pages was braver than I'd expected, more resilient and creative and capable of joy than the person I'd thought myself to be. I also started volunteering at the animal shelter, drawn by memories of the cats and dogs I'd loved throughout my life but had been too busy to properly enjoy. Working with abandoned animals felt appropriate given my own circumstances. We were all learning to trust again after betrayal, all discovering that love was possible even after loss. My favorite volunteer assignment was socializing the older cats, the ones that had been surrendered by families who could no longer care for them or who'd been found as strays after years of independence. These cats reminded me of myself, wary but not broken, capable of affection but selective about who deserved it. I spent hours in the cat rooms, reading aloud or simply sitting quietly while skittish animals decided whether I could be trusted. One particular cat captured my attention almost immediately. Moxie was a 10-year-old tortoiseshell who'd been surrendered when her elderly owner moved to assisted living. She was beautiful but aloof, accepting attention on her own terms and making it clear that any relationship would require patience and respect for her boundaries. "She's been here for 3 months," the shelter director told me. "People want kittens or young cats. Senior cats like Moxie are harder to place, especially ones with attitude." I understood attitude. I was developing quite a bit of it myself. The morning I found myself considering adopting Moxie was the morning I realized how far I'd come from the devastated woman who'd returned from her cruise to find her life demolished. That woman had been powerless, dependent on others for basic security and afraid to assert her own needs. This woman was making independent choices about how to spend her time and money and heart. The adoption process required a home visit from a shelter volunteer, a cheerful woman named Rita who inspected my apartment and asked questions about my experience with pets and my long-term plans. "Moxie is a special cat," Rita explained as she approved my application. "She's been through a lot of changes in her life, and it might take time for her to settle in. But once she bonds with you, she'll be incredibly loyal." Loyalty earned through patience and respect, rather than demanded through obligation. It sounded like the kind of relationship I was learning to value. I brought Moxie home on a snowy December afternoon, setting up her carrier in the living room and opening the door without expectations. She emerged cautiously, sniffing every corner of the apartment and inspecting the furniture with the thoroughness of a quality control inspector. Only after she'd completed her survey did she approach me, allowing me to scratch behind her ears while she decided whether this new situation met her standards. That first night, she slept on the floor beside my bed, close enough to monitor my movements but maintaining her independence. By the end of the week, she'd claimed the sunny spot on the living room rug as her own territory. By the end of the month, she was sleeping on the foot of my bed, purring softly as she kept watch over her new domain. Having Moxie in the apartment changed the energy of the space in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her presence made the place feel less temporary, more like a real home than a way station between chapters of my life. Caring for her gave structure to my days and reminded me that I was capable of nurturing relationships based on mutual choice rather than biological obligation. Christmas approached with less anxiety than I'd expected. I bought a small tree and decorated it with new ornaments, creating traditions that belonged to this life rather than trying to recreate celebrations from my past. Moxie was fascinated by the twinkling lights and claimed the space under the tree as her new favorite napping spot. Jessica and I exchanged gifts on Christmas Eve, keeping the celebration simple and focused on our relationship rather than elaborate productions designed to impress extended family. I gave her a photo album filled with pictures from my art classes and walks around town, documenting my journey of rediscovery. She gave me a beautiful pottery glazing set and a book about famous female artists who'd found their voices later in life. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she said as we sat by the tree, Moxie purring between us. "You've turned something terrible into something beautiful." Looking around my apartment, filled with objects I'd chosen, and art I'd created, and a cat who'd chosen me as much as I'd chosen her, I realized she was right. The life I was building bore no resemblance to the one I'd lost, but it was mine in a way that previous life had never been. I wasn't trying to please anyone or meet anyone's expectations. I was simply being myself, discovering what that meant one choice at a time. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my balcony with a glass of champagne, watching fireworks bloom over the downtown skyline. Eleanor had invited me to her party, but I'd chosen solitude instead, wanting to mark the transition between years in quiet reflection rather than forced celebration. The year that was ending had brought the worst betrayal of my life, but also the greatest liberation. I'd lost my house, my financial security, and my faith in my children, but I'd found my strength, my voice, and my capacity for joy. The woman who would greet the new year was different from the one who'd boarded that cruise ship 14 months ago, not because of what had been taken from her, but because of what she'd chosen to build from the ruins. As midnight approached, I raised my glass to the stars and made a silent toast to the future I was creating, one independent choice at a time. The knock on my door came on a rainy Thursday morning in March, exactly 18 months after my world had collapsed. I was glazing a ceramic vase I'd thrown in pottery class, Moxie supervising from her perch on the windowsill, when the unexpected visitor interrupted my peaceful routine. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing on my covered porch, her hair damp from the spring rain and her face bearing an expression I'd never seen before. Not the defensive anger or guilty justification I remembered from our last encounters, but something that looked remarkably like humility. I considered not answering. My life had found a beautiful equilibrium without my eldest children in it, and I felt no obligation to disrupt that peace for their convenience. But curiosity won over caution, and I opened the door. "Hello, Sarah." "Mom." Her voice cracked slightly on the word. "I know I have no right to be here, but I was hoping we could talk." I studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly as she clutched a manila envelope. Whatever had brought her to my doorstep, it wasn't casual. "You can come in for a few minutes." She followed me into the living room, her eyes taking in the transformed space with something that might have been wonder. The bright colors, the artwork on the walls, the evidence of a life lived entirely on my own terms. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's so... you." Moxie regarded our visitor with the suspicious disdain she reserved for all strangers, then pointedly turned her back and began grooming herself with elaborate indifference. "What did you want to talk about, Sarah?" She sat on the edge of my sage green sofa, the envelope clutched in her lap like a shield. "I came to give you this, and to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." The envelope contained a cashier's check for $43,000, along with a detailed accounting of every penny they'd taken from my trust fund. The final payment, with interest calculated and included. David's business finally turned around, she explained. "We got a big contract with the state for highway signage. We're not rich, but we're stable now. I wanted to pay you back in full, immediately, instead of dragging it out over years." I set the check aside without much emotion. The money mattered less now than it had 18 months ago. I'd learned to live within my means and discovered that those means were more than adequate for the life I'd chosen. "And what else did you want to tell me?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "I wanted to tell you that you were right, about everything. We didn't steal your house because we were concerned about you. We stole it because we were desperate and saw an opportunity. We convinced ourselves we were helping you to make ourselves feel better about what we were doing." The admission hung in the air between us. I'd known this truth for months, but hearing her finally acknowledge it felt significant. "I've been in therapy," she continued. "Individual counseling and family therapy with David. Dr. Morrison helped me understand how we justified our actions, how we made you the problem instead of taking responsibility for our own financial mistakes." "What else did Dr. Morrison help you understand?" "That we treated you like you were incompetent, because it was easier than admitting we were the ones who couldn't manage our lives. That we saw you as someone who existed to solve our problems instead of as a person with your own needs and desires. That we never really saw you at all." Her voice broke on the last words, and I felt an unexpected stirring of sympathy. The tears rolling down her face seemed genuine, free of the manipulation that had characterized so many of our previous encounters. "Sarah, why are you telling me this now?" "Because Michael's marriage is falling apart. Jennifer left him 3 months ago and took Elena. She said she couldn't trust a man who would steal from his own mother. That if he could betray you, so easily, he'd eventually betray her too." The news hit me harder than I'd expected. Michael's marriage destroyed by the same betrayal that had destroyed our relationship. Another generation paying the price for choices made in desperation. She was right to leave, I said quietly. Character isn't situational. If someone will steal from family, they'll steal from anyone when the circumstances suit them. Sarah flinched but didn't argue. Michael's been drinking heavily. He lost his job last month because he was coming in late and missing deadlines. He's living in a studio apartment and can barely afford child support. He talks about wanting to apologize to you, but he's too ashamed to reach out. And you think I should reach out to him instead? No. The answer surprised me. I think Michael needs to fix himself before he can fix his relationships with other people. I'm not here to ask you to forgive him or to rebuild our family. I'm here to apologize and to tell you that seeing you build this new life has been the most humbling experience of my own life. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to recognizing. But there was something different in her posture, her voice, her entire presence, an authenticity I hadn't seen since she was a child. What? Do you mean? I mean that for 18 months, I've been watching you thrive without us. I've been seeing the reports Jessica brings back about your art classes and your photography and your volunteer work. I've been forced to confront the fact that instead of helping you by selling your house, we actually freed you to become someone incredible. She gestured around the apartment, taking in the evidence of my transformation. This woman, the one who lives here and creates beautiful things and has adventures and makes independent choices. This is who you always were underneath the role we forced you to play. We didn't just steal your house, Mom. We stole decades of your authentic self by making you believe your value came from serving us. The insight was more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. Sarah had indeed forced me into a role of perpetual caretaker, accepting my sacrifices as natural while never questioning what those sacrifices might be costing me. I can't undo what we did, she continued. I can't give you back those years of living for everyone else instead of yourself. But I wanted you to know that I see you now. I see who you really are, and I'm amazed by your strength and your creativity and your courage to start over. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of anger I'd carried for so long it had become part of my identity. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition that genuine remorse deserved acknowledgement. Sarah, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you paying back the money. But I need you to understand that our relationship can never go back to what it was before. I know, I wouldn't want it to. The old relationship was built on us taking advantage of your generosity and you enabling our dependence. If we're going to have any relationship going forward, it needs to be between equals who respect each other's boundaries. What would that look like to you? She considered the question carefully. Maybe occasional coffee dates when you feel like seeing me. Maybe updates about your life when you want to share them. Maybe phone calls on holidays if you're interested. But no expectations, no obligations, no guilt trips about family duty. It was exactly what I would have asked for if I'd thought she was capable of offering it. A relationship based on mutual choice rather than genetic obligation. I'd be open to that, I said. But slowly, and only if you can truly accept that my life doesn't revolve around you anymore. I can accept that. I want that for you. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both absorbing the significance of this conversation. Outside, the rain had stopped, and afternoon sunlight was beginning to stream through the windows. Mom, can I ask what you've learned from all this? I mean, what would you tell other women who might be going through something similar? I thought about the question seriously. I'd tell them that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing. I'd tell them that you can't build an authentic life on the foundation of other people's expectations. I'd tell them that it's never too late to discover who you are when you stop being who everyone else needs you to be. Sarah nodded, absorbing this wisdom. And I'd tell them that real love requires respect, and respect requires recognizing the other person as a complete individual rather than an extension of yourself. She stood to leave, pausing at the door to look back at me one more time. Thank you for letting me say this. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. And thank you for not giving up on the possibility that people can change and grow. After she left, I sat on my balcony with Moxie in my lap, watching the garden emerge from winter dormancy. The bulbs I'd planted in the fall were beginning to push through the soil, promising blooms that would transform the space in the coming weeks. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Sarah told me about her visit. How are you feeling? Typed back. Peaceful. Proud. Ready for whatever comes next. And I was. The woman who'd returned from that cruise 18 months ago had been devastated by betrayal. The woman sitting in this garden apartment had been forged by that betrayal into someone stronger, more authentic, more fully herself than she'd ever imagined possible. My children had sold my house while I was on vacation, claiming they needed the money. But they'd given me something far more valuable in return. The chance to discover who I was when I stopped living for everyone else and started living for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.